I'm Aubrey Mitchell, 34 and 3 years away from my childhood mansion didn't prepare me for what awaited. The Connecticut snow crunched under my boots as I approached the grand house where warm memories once lived. My successful business kept me away, but nothing excuses missing my parents' funeral 6 months ago. My brother Ryan's eyes turned to ice as he opened the door. "This year's only for real family," he said coldly. And that's when I realized the inheritance war had begun. Before I dive into this nightmare drop, a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, and subscribe to join me on this wild journey of betrayal and redemption. The foyer still smelled like cinnamon and pine, just as it had every New Year's Eve of my childhood. But something was different. My gaze traveled to the wall of family photos lining the grand staircase. In each frame, there stood Ryan, Heather, and our parents, Diana and Howard Mitchell, smiling broadly at milestone events, graduations, vacations, holidays. I moved closer, confusion swirling in my stomach. Every photo that once included me had been replaced with a version where I was conspicuously absent, as if I'd been systematically erased from the family history. "We did some redecorating," Ryan said, coming up behind me. His voice held no warmth, nothing of the brother who once helped me build snow forts in the front yard. I'd been 12 when the Mitchells adopted me. Diana and Howard, already parents to Ryan and Heather, brought me into their wealthy home after my biological parents died in a car crash. The transition wasn't always smooth. I was older, more aware of being the newcomer, but Diana and Howard had never treated me differently from their biological children. At least, that's what I'd believed for 22 years. "Mom and Dad would hate what you've done with the photos," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ryan's laugh was sharp. "You don't get to talk about what they would have wanted." 6 months ago, Diana and Howard Mitchell died when their private plane crashed in the Adirondacks. I'd been in Tokyo finalizing a major business deal when I got the call. By the time I made arrangements to return, the funeral had already happened. Ryan had insisted they couldn't wait. Now, I wondered if that had been deliberate. "The reading of the will was supposed to happen months ago," I said, following Ryan into the living room where a fire roared in the massive stone fireplace. "Gerald suggested we wait until we could all be together," Ryan replied. "Family tradition to start the new year with clear account." Gerald Thompson was the family lawyer, a fixture at Mitchell gatherings since before I arrived. He'd always been kind to me, sneaking me extra desserts at dinner parties and asking about my grades. My sister Heather entered from the kitchen, her face tightening when she saw me. At 36, she looked more like our mother than ever with her honey blonde hair and slender frame. "Aubrey," she said, not moving to hug me as she once would have. "We weren't sure you'd make it." Behind her came our Aunt Judith, Diana's older sister. She'd always been distant with me, but her current glare held active hostility. "Well, well. The prodigal daughter returns when there's money on the table," Aunt Judith remarked, making no attempt to hide her disdain. "I'm here because this is my family," I replied, my throat tightening. "Why is everyone acting like I'm an intruder?" No one answered. Instead, Ryan gestured toward the stairs. "You can put your things in the blue room. We've made some changes around here." The blue room was what we called the former servants' quarters, far from the family bedrooms. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was not welcome as family. As I made my way upstairs, I passed my childhood bedroom. The door stood open, revealing not the space where I'd grown up, but boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. All my belongings, all evidence that I'd once belonged here, had been packed away. From the landing, I heard voices downstairs. "Shouldn't have invited her at all," Aunt Judith was saying. "Gerald insisted all beneficiaries be present," Ryan responded. "We'll make sure she doesn't get what doesn't belong to her," Heather added, her voice barely audible. I froze, my hand gripping the banister. What were they planning? Why was my family suddenly united against me? When I returned downstairs an hour later, Gerald Thompson had arrived. The elderly lawyer looked uncomfortable when he saw me, his usual warm smile replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. "Aubrey, my dear, it's been too long," he said, patting my arm awkwardly. I cornered Ryan in the kitchen as he poured himself a generous whiskey. "What's happening here? Why is everyone treating me like an enemy?" My brother's blue eyes, so like our father's, were cold as he looked at me. "Blood is thicker than paper, Aubrey. You might have fooled Mom and Dad with your perfect daughter act, but the game is over now." Game. They were my parents too. Ryan leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Were they? We'll see what the law has to say about that. As he walked away, I stood frozen in the kitchen, suddenly understanding that this wasn't just a family rift. This was war, and apparently it had been planned for some time. Whatever was going to happen at tomorrow's will, reading my siblings had prepared for it, and I was walking into their trap completely blindsided. New Year's Eve dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. The dining room gleamed with Diana's best china and crystal, the table set for a celebration that felt more like a funeral. Ryan sat at the head of the table, our father's position, while Aunt Judith took our mother's place. The message was clear: the true Mitchell family was reordering itself with no space for me. "Remember that New Year's when Aubrey knocked over the champagne tower?" Heather asked with a brittle laugh. Dad's clients were so upset. "I was 15, I said quietly. "And Dad laughed about it later." "Howard was always too soft with you," Aunt Judith commented, cutting into her beef tenderloin with unnecessary force. "Diana worried about how it would affect you in the long run." Gerald Thompson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Though invited to dinner, he'd barely touched his food, his eyes moving anxiously between family members. "Perhaps we should save discussion of family matters until tomorrow's reading," he suggested. "Why wait?" Ryan challenged, setting down his wine glass with a thud. "We all know why we're here." Ryan Gerald warned, but my brother continued. "Let's not pretend this is a normal family gathering," he said, his eyes fixed on me. "Aubrey abandoned this family years ago, only showing up when there's something to gain." "That's not true," I protested. "I've been building my business." Mom and Dad were proud of that. "Were they?" Heather asked softly. "Or did they just tell you that?" After dinner, we gathered in Howard's study. The dark wood paneling and leather-bound books created the somber atmosphere of a courtroom, which seemed fitting for what was about to unfold. Gerald removed several documents from his briefcase, arranging them carefully on the desk. "As you know, I'm here to execute the last will and testament of Diana and Howard Mitchell," he began formally. "In the event of their deaths, they specified that their estate be handled jointly with all assets distributed according to the document I'll now read." My hands trembled in my lap as Gerald put on his reading glasses and began. "To our children, Ryan, Heather, and Aubrey Mitchell, we leave our estate in equal portions, including the family home investments and business holdings." "That's enough," Ryan interrupted, standing abruptly. He pulled a folder from inside his jacket. "Before we continue, there's a legal matter that needs addressing." Gerald looked startled. "Ryan, this is highly irregular." "What my brother has discovered is highly irregular," Aunt Judith interjected. "The children deserve to know the truth." Ryan opened the folder and removed several documents, which he handed to Gerald. "These are records from the Connecticut Department of Children and Families dated 1999. My heart began to pound as Gerald scanned the papers, his expression darkening. "What are those?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Ryan turned to me, triumph gleaming in his eyes. "Your adoption was never legally finalized." The room spun around me. "What? That's impossible." "There was a filing error," Ryan continued smoothly. "The final court date was scheduled, but there's no record it ever occurred. No judge ever signed off on your adoption." Which means Aunt Judith added you were never legally a Mitchell. Memories flooded back my 12th birthday just weeks after moving in with the Mitchells. Diana had taken me shopping for a special dress, telling me we had an important date at the courthouse. I remembered sitting in a wood-paneled room, a kind-faced judge asking if I wanted the Mitchells to be my family forever. I remembered saying yes. This is a mistake, I insisted, turning to Gerald. You handled the adoption. You know it was completed. Gerald looked uncomfortable. I prepared the paperwork, but I wasn't present at the final hearing. If these documents are accurate, they're accurate, Ryan said firmly. I've had experts verify everything. Why would you do this? I asked, tears threatening. What possible reason? Don't play innocent, Heather cut in. You weren't even at their funeral. You've spent years taking their money while building your precious company, barely visiting, except when you needed something. That's not true, I protested. I called them every week. We talked about everything. They understood why I couldn't visit more often. Did they? Aunt Judith asked. Because Diana told me many times how she regretted the adoption. How you never truly bonded with the family. The words struck like physical blows. Had my mother really said that I couldn't believe it? Diana had been the one who held me through nightmares about my biological parents' accident, who celebrated every achievement no matter how small. Heather remained silent, not meeting my eyes. Though she joined in the dinner table jabs, something in her demeanor suggested discomfort with the situation. Even if there was some paperwork issue, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, Mom and Dad considered me their daughter. Their will names me specifically. Ryan smiled coldly. A will can be contested if it attempts to give property to someone with no legal right to it. Which brings us to tomorrow's agenda. We'll be filing to have you removed as a beneficiary. I turned to Gerald, desperate for support. Is this legal? Can they do this? The elderly lawyer sighed heavily. If the adoption was never finalized, it creates a complex legal situation. Ryan has clearly consulted with other attorneys already. For months, Ryan confirmed. We hired investigators to verify everything. The realization that my siblings had been planning this while I grieved our parents alone made me physically ill. I think I need some air, I managed, rising unsteadily. As I reached the door, Gerald called out softly. Aubrey, might I have a word in private before you go? Minutes later in the solarium, where no one could overhear, Gerald spoke frankly. What they're attempting has legal precedent, but it's not a guaranteed strategy. However, fighting them will be expensive and lengthy. They're counting on you not having the resources for a prolonged court battle. So I'm just supposed to walk away with nothing. After 22 years as a Mitchell, Gerald looked pained. I'm not advising that. I'm simply explaining what you're up against. Ryan has been planning this since before the funeral. I thought about leaving about, walking away from the toxicity and pain. But something in me hardened. This wasn't just about money. It was about my identity, my place in the world. I'm not leaving, I said firmly. This is my home too, and I'm going to fight for it. I awoke on New Year's Day to my phone buzzing incessantly. Texts, emails, and news alerts flooded in, all carrying variations of the same message. Have you seen the Tribune? With shaking hands, I pulled up the website of our local newspaper. The headline made my blood run cold. Mitchell family fortune in dispute. Adopted daughter claims inheritance despite legal questions. The article detailed how I portrayed as a money-hungry opportunist who had abandoned my adoptive family years ago was attempting to claim a third of the Mitchell fortune, despite questions about the legality of my adoption. It quoted family sources, claiming I'd only maintained contact when financial support was needed for my business. I scrolled down to find a particularly damaging quote, Aubrey only came around when she wanted money. She didn't even attend her parents' funeral. There was no mention of my being in Tokyo on business. No mention of Ryan insisting they couldn't wait for my return. The narrative had been carefully constructed to paint me as an ungrateful gold digger. I threw on clothes and rushed downstairs, finding Ryan calmly eating breakfast in the kitchen. "How could you?" I demanded, thrusting my phone in his face. He shrugged, not bothering to deny his involvement. "The community deserves to know the truth about the Mitchell estate. Transparency is important." "This isn't transparency, it's character assassination." "Is it?" He raised an eyebrow. "Everything in that article is factually correct. You weren't at the funeral. You did move away. Your adoption does have legal questions. You know that's not the whole story." Ryan sipped his coffee. "The court of public opinion doesn't require the whole story, just a compelling narrative." When I ventured into town later that day, the effects of Ryan's media campaign became immediately clear. At the local grocery store, Mrs. Pemberton, who had taught piano to all 3 Mitchell children, turned away when she saw me. At the coffee shop, conversations hushed as I entered, resuming in whispers once I'd collected my drink. Madison Cooper, my closest childhood friend and the one person I'd hoped might offer support, texted, asking if we could talk about what's happening. When we met at the park, her expression was guarded. "I just don't understand," she said, maintaining a careful distance on our bench. "Why wouldn't you come home for their funeral?" I tried Madison. I was in Tokyo finalizing a deal that Mom and Dad were excited about. By the time I could arrange a flight, Ryan said everything was already done. She looked skeptical. "And you barely visited in the last 3 years. I called every week. We had family video chats. Dad was planning to visit my office in Chicago next month." My voice broke as I realized he never would. Madison's expression softened slightly. "It's just." Ryan showed me some emails. "From you to your parents asking for money." I stared at her in shock. What emails? I never asked them for money. They seemed pretty real, Aubrey. When I returned to the house, I found my laptop moved from where I'd left it. The password had been changed, but I managed to reset it. Opening my email, I discovered dozens of messages I'd never written correspondence with my parents over the past 3 years, all painting me as demanding and ungrateful. The forgeries were clever, using details only someone with intimate knowledge of my business would know. But they contained subtle inconsistencies, references to projects I'd abandoned, requests for funding I'd never needed. Footsteps in the hallway made me look up. Heather stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Finding everything you need?" she asked. "Did you help him forge these emails?" I demanded. Something flickered across her face, guilt perhaps, before her expression hardened again. "I don't know what you're talking about. Heather, we used to be close." "What happened?" She looked away. "You left. You built your perfect life elsewhere, while we stayed and took care of everything here. That's not fair. I was building something Mom and Dad were proud of." Were they? She challenged. "Or did they just say that to keep you happy?" Later that afternoon, frantic calls from my business partners confirmed the attack had spread. Anonymous emails had been sent to clients and investors, suggesting my company was built on fraudulent practices and stolen family money. 3 clients have already pulled out, my partner Jack reported anxiously. "What's going on, Aubrey?" As my professional reputation unraveled alongside my personal one, I retreated to the garden greenhouse, a place that had always offered solace during difficult teenage years. Among the orchids my mother had lovingly tended, I finally allowed myself to cry. "Miss Aubrey." I looked up to find Samuel, the family's longtime gardener, standing hesitantly at the door. At 70, he'd been with the Mitchells since before I arrived. His gentle manner and quiet wisdom, a constant presence throughout my childhood. "Samuel," I said, quickly wiping my tears. "I didn't know you were still here." "Every day except Sundays, just like always." He moved carefully among the plants, checking soil moisture. "Your mother's favorites still need tending." "Did you?" I hesitated. Did my parents ever say they regretted adopting me? Samuel's weathered hands stilled. He turned to me, his expression serious. In all my years here, I never once heard either of your parents express anything but pride when speaking of you, Miss Aubrey. Ryan and Aunt Judith are saying different. Samuel's face tightened. Mr. Ryan has ideas about family that don't match what your parents believed. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. Your mother gave me this before their trip. Said if anything happened, I should make sure you got into her garden journal. I recognized the key instantly. It opened the ornate wooden box where Diana kept her most treasured possessions. Why would she? I began. Your mother was perceptive, Samuel said quietly, and cautious. The journal is hidden behind the false panel in her desk. The one Mr. Howard installed when you children kept finding your Christmas presents. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I slipped into Diana's study. Using the moonlight to guide me, I located the hidden panel and the beautiful leather-bound journal inside. Pages of my mother's elegant handwriting documented not just her beloved plants, but her thoughts about her children. Entry after entry mentioned her pride in my accomplishments, her joy in watching me grow into independence. There was no resentment, no regret, only love. The final entry, dated just days before the crash, read, Aubrey called today with news about the Tokyo expansion. Howard and I couldn't be prouder. Ryan seemed upset when we shared our excitement at dinner. His recent behavior worries me. I've asked Gerald to ensure our wishes are clearly documented before our trip, just in case. As I closed the journal, I realized two things. My mother had suspected something was wrong with Ryan's behavior, and I had found my first ally in Samuel. The fight for my family and my identity was just beginning, and I would need all the support I could get. The next morning, my credit card was declined at the local cafe. Embarrassed, I pulled out another, only to have it rejected as well. By the third card's failure, the barista was giving me pitying looks, and whispers had broken out among the other customers. Back in my car, I called my bank only to be informed that all my accounts had been frozen due to an ongoing fraud investigation. According to the representative, someone had reported suspicious transfers between my personal accounts and the Mitchell Family Trust. We've been contacted by Mr. Ryan Mitchell, who serves as director at First Connecticut Trust, the bank representative explained. He's provided documentation suggesting unauthorized access. Ryan had leveraged his position at the family's bank to cut off my financial resources. The calculated precision of the attack left me breathless. Without access to my accounts, I couldn't pay my mortgage, couldn't fund my legal defense, couldn't even buy groceries. Back at the house, a FedEx envelope waited for me. Inside was a notice that access to my Chicago apartment would be terminated in 48 hours due to unauthorized occupancy of Mitchell family property. The apartment I'd lived in for 3 years that I'd painted and furnished myself was apparently owned by a Mitchell subsidiary I'd never heard of. My phone rang. My assistant in Chicago, panic in her voice. Aubrey, there are people here changing the locks on the office. They say they have authorization from Mitchell Holdings. That's impossible, I said, though by now nothing seemed impossible. Mitchell Holdings has nothing to do with our company. They're showing paperwork saying Mitchell Capital was used as seed funding. They're claiming the whole operation belongs to the family trust. I'd used my own savings to start the business. But if Ryan had falsified documents showing Mitchell money as the source, it would take months to sort out months, during which I'd have no company, no income, and no resources to fight the inheritance battle. A text from Madison interrupted my spiraling thoughts. We need to talk. Not at your house. Meet me at Lakeside Stables in an hour. The Mitchell family's private stables had been my sanctuary as a teenager. Thunder, the gentle bay gelding my parents had gifted me for my 16th birthday, had been my confidant through college applications and first heartbreaks. When I arrived, Madison was already there looking nervous. "I've been asking around," she said, without preamble. "The story Ryan's telling doesn't add up. What changed your mind?" "He showed me those emails, but they referenced a charity gala you supposedly refused to attend. Except I saw you there, we took selfies together." Relief flooded through me. "You believe me. I'm starting to. And there's something else." She looked around cautiously before continuing. "Ryan tried to convince me to sign an affidavit about you borrowing money from me and never repaying it. I've never borrowed money from you." "Exactly." When I pointed that out, he became intimidating. Said I needed to pick the right side if I wanted to keep my job at the hospital foundation. Madison worked for a nonprofit where Aunt Judith served as board chair, another pressure point Ryan could exploit. "There's more," Madison said, leading me toward the stables. "I came early because I heard from Jamie, the stable manager. As we approached Thunder's stall, I found it empty." My heart sank. "Ryan sold him yesterday," Madison explained gently. "Jamie tried to stop it, but the papers showed Ryan as the legal owner." I pressed my forehead against the wooden stall door, fighting tears. Taking my money and property was one thing, but Thunder, the cruelty seemed designed to break my spirit. "Miss Aubrey." I turned to find Jamie, the weathered stable manager, approaching cautiously. "I'm sorry about Thunder," he said, "but I thought you should know the buyer was Mr. Patterson from the next county. He's a good man who lets me know when his horses are for sale. If you can match the price once this family matter settles." It was a small kindness, but it sparked something in me. Not everyone was against me. As Madison drove me back to town, she formulated a plan. "You need allies and information. I can help with both. Ryan will come after you," I warned. "Let him try. My father's the district attorney, remember?" She smiled grimly. "Now, what do you know about Ryan's finances? Because rumors at the country club suggest he's not as solvent as he pretends." Madison's connections yielded valuable intelligence over the next days. Ryan had accumulated significant gambling debts in the months before our parents' deaths. He'd been passed over for promotion at the bank 3 times his risky investment strategies, raising concerns with senior management. "He needs the full inheritance," Madison concluded. "Not just a third, all of it." As my understanding grew, so did my support network. Rachel Chen, a client who'd ignored the anonymous emails, reached out offering both moral support and a temporary consulting opportunity. "Whatever's happening with your company, I know your work," she said firmly. "And I need your expertise for this project." The cash payment for consulting wasn't much, but it gave me breathing room to plan my next moves. Just as I began to feel hopeful, a new blow landed. Jessica Adams, the family's accountant who'd been acting sympathetically, forwarded me an email I'd supposedly sent her requesting unusual transfers from Mitchell accounts. Transfers I'd never authorized or even discussed. "I assumed you had authorization," she wrote. "I've already reported this to Ryan as potential fraud." When I confronted her by phone, her apology seemed rehearsed. "I really thought I was helping you, Aubrey. Ryan explained everything afterward, how you've been manipulating accounts for years." Another ally revealed as an enemy. But why would the family accountant turn against me so decisively? The answer came that evening when I observed Jessica's car parked at Ryan's private apartment in town, far longer than a professional meeting would require. As my financial situation grew more desperate, Samuel quietly slipped me information about accounts our parents had maintained separately from the main family holdings, accounts Ryan might not know about. Madison helped me access records from the home office, searching for evidence of Ryan's machinations. It felt like fighting an octopus each time I addressed one attack, another tentacle wrapped around a different part of my life. But with each blow, my determination only grew stronger. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reclaiming my identity and honoring the family that had chosen me, regardless of what a missing signature might suggest. 3 days after New Year's, Madison helped me access the family records stored in Howard's home office. Ryan had changed the locks on the door, but Samuel quietly pointed out that the connecting passage through the library still used the original key. "We need to find anything related to the adoption," Madison whispered, as we carefully sorted through filing cabinets. Birth certificates, court documents, anything with official seals. I was flipping through a folder of family medical records when a document caught my eye, a hospital report for Heather, dated years before I joined the family. "That's strange," I murmured. "This lists Heather's blood type as AB, but both our parents were type A." Madison, whose father had drilled her on genetics during her pre-med phase, looked up sharply. "That's genetically impossible. 2 type A parents can't have an AB child. Could it be a mistake?" "On a medical record, unlikely." We dug deeper, finding a thin folder labeled HM Adoption, tucked behind tax returns from 1996. Inside were partial documents, indicating that Heather, my supposedly biological sister, had been adopted as an infant. "She doesn't know," I whispered, the realization dawning. "Heather has no idea she's adopted." "But how could she not know?" Madison asked. "She was only a year old when they adopted her. They must have decided not to tell her." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Heather's aggression, her reluctance to make eye contact, her silence. When Ryan and Aunt Judith were at their most vicious. She wasn't just being cruel, she was protecting a secret she didn't even know she had. "Ryan knows," I said with certainty. "That's why she follows his lead without question. He's holding this over her somehow. But if she doesn't know she's adopted, he must have figured it out and implied he'd expose her if she didn't support him against me." Before we could discuss further, voices in the hallway sent us scrambling to replace the files. We slipped out through the library just as Ryan and Gerald entered the office from the main door. That night, I found Heather alone in the conservatory, staring out at the snow-covered gardens. For the first time, I noticed the tension in her shoulders, the exhaustion in her face. "I know about the blood type," I said without preamble. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. "What are you talking about?" "Heather, I know you're adopted too." All color drained from her face. "I don't know what your type AB blood. Mom and Dad were both type A. It's genetically impossible unless you're adopted." She sank onto a bench, hands trembling. "Ryan said something similar last year, that he'd found inconsistencies in my birth certificate. I told him he was crazy, but you started wondering," I prompted gently. Tears filled her eyes. "I found a letter in Mom's desk after they died. It talked about finalizing arrangements for baby girl Mitchell. I confronted Ryan and he." Her voice broke. "He said if I ever told anyone or stopped supporting him, he'd make sure everyone knew I wasn't a real Mitchell either. So you helped him attack me to protect yourself." She nodded miserably. "I'm sorry, Aubrey. I was scared. Everything I thought about myself, my identity, my place in this family, it was all built on a lie." "No," I said, firmly sitting beside her. "The lie is thinking that adoption makes us less their children. Mom and Dad chose us, Heather. They wanted us. But why did they tell you and not me?" "Because I was older when they adopted me. I already knew I'd had different parents before. They probably planned to tell you when you were older, and then..." I shrugged. Maybe it never seemed like the right time. For a moment, we sat in silence, 2 adopted sisters united in a truth only one of us had known. "Ryan threatened to expose me publicly," Heather finally said. "Said he'd make sure everyone knew my whole life was a fraud. The way he's doing to me now," I observed. "Yes." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since my return. "Aubrey, I'm so sorry. The emails, the bank accounts he made me help with all of it. Why is he doing this? It can't just be about money." Heather's laugh was bitter. "Of course it's about money. Ryan's been living beyond his means for years, but it's also about control. He always resented how proud Mom and Dad were of you. As we talked, Heather revealed how Ryan had been pressuring Gerald Thompson with vague threats about irregularities in his legal practice. The elderly lawyer was approaching retirement and feared a scandal that would destroy his reputation. Ryan has something on almost everyone, Heather explained. Even Aunt Judith, he's been covering her gambling debts for years. Will you help me? I asked directly. Will you stand with me against him? Fear flickered in her eyes. He'll destroy me, Aubrey. Everything I have, everything I am. We'll protect each other, I promised. But I need to know the truth about everything he's done. Our conversation was interrupted by the conservatory door slamming open. Aunt Judith stood there, her expression thunderous. What are you two plotting? She demanded. Just sister talk, I replied calmly. Heather, remember where your loyalties lie, Aunt Judith warned. Blood is thicker than water. Funny, you should mention blood, I said, rising to my feet. We were just discussing genetics. The color drained from Judith's face. She knew. She'd always known both of us were adopted. Heather, come with me, she ordered. Your brother needs to speak with you. With an apologetic glance at me, Heather followed Aunt Judith from the room. But something had changed between us. An alliance tentative but real had been formed. Later that night, a folded note slipped under my door. In Heather's handwriting, Ryan altered the original will. Thompson knows, but is too scared to admit it. We need proof. This was the breakthrough I needed. If Ryan had tampered with our parents' will, proving it would not only secure my inheritance, but potentially lead to criminal charges. But finding that proof would mean going directly against a man who had already proven his willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The letter from the IRS arrived exactly 1 week after my return to the Mitchell home, its clinical language masking the devastating impact. We are opening an investigation into potential tax evasion and fraudulent reporting for the tax years 2022 to 2023. According to the notice, an anonymous source had provided evidence that I had underreported business income and claimed illegitimate deductions related to the Mitchell family trust. The investigation would freeze any remaining financial assets while the audit proceeded. I sat on the edge of my bed, the paper trembling in my hands. This wasn't just another attack, this was potentially criminal. If convicted of tax fraud, I could face not only financial ruin but imprisonment. My phone rang. It was Rachel, my remaining client. Aubrey, I'm sorry, she began, her voice tight with discomfort. Someone sent files to my board suggesting your advice violated regulatory guidelines. They're requiring me to terminate our contract immediately. My last source of income gone. I ended the call and let the phone slip from my fingers. A knock at the door revealed Samuel, his weathered face grave. Miss Aubrey, I need to speak with you. In private. We walked the grounds, the January air bitter against my face. Samuel's shoulders were hunched, his usual dignified posture absent. Mr. Ryan terminated my employment this morning, he said without preamble. After 43 years with the Mitchell family. Samuel, no. That's outrageous. He claimed I've been helping you access private family documents. A faint smile touched his lips. Which, of course, I have. I'm so sorry. This is all because of me. He shook his head. No, Miss Aubrey. This is because Mr. Ryan has forgotten what family truly means. He pressed something into my hand, a small flash drive. Your father gave me this before their trip, said to keep it safe just in case. Before I could ask what it contained, we rounded a bend in the garden path and found Madison waiting, her expression frantic. There you are, I've been calling for hours. My phone. Never mind that. Ryan's people were at my apartment this morning. They're telling the hospital board I've been accessing confidential patient information. The systematic isolation continued. Everyone who helped me was being targeted, their livelihoods threatened. You should both stay away from me, I said, sudden exhaustion washing over me. He's going to destroy anyone who takes my side. It's too late for that, Madison replied grimly. I'm already labeled your co-conspirator. We might as well actually conspire. That night, as I attempted to access the flash drive Samuel had given me, my laptop suddenly shut down. When it rebooted, all files were gone, wiped clean by sophisticated malware that had been activated remotely. The flash drive itself was corrupted, its contents inaccessible. The next morning, 2 police officers appeared at the door, asking to speak with me regarding financial irregularities at my company. They had a warrant to search my belongings. In my suitcase, they found documents I'd never seen before, printouts of emails discussing ways to divert Mitchell funds and cover the paper trail. These aren't mine, I protested as they bagged the evidence. Someone planted them. The officers remained professionally non-committal, but I could read the skepticism in their expressions. The town where I'd grown up, where everyone knew the Mitchell name, had already decided I was guilty of greed, of fraud, of not being a real daughter. By evening, Madison texted that she'd been suspended from her position pending investigation. Samuel reported that his apartment in the gardener's cottage had been ransacked. The stress of the constant attacks took its toll physically. After 3 days of barely eating or sleeping, I collapsed while walking up the mansion's grand staircase. I awoke in the local hospital, an IV in my arm, and a doctor speaking about exhaustion and dehydration. You need rest, he emphasized. Your body is shutting down from stress. Later that evening, the door to my hospital room opened and Ryan stepped in. Immaculately dressed as always, he pulled a chair to my bedside and sat regarding me with what appeared to be genuine concern. This has gone far enough, Aubrey, he said, his voice gentler than I'd heard since my return. Look at what this fight is doing to you. What you're doing to me, I corrected weakly. He sighed. I didn't want it to go this far. The tax investigation, the police, that wasn't my intention. What did you expect when you started this? I expected you to take the hint and leave with dignity. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Which you can still do. I've prepared settlement papers. 5% of the estate clean break, all investigations drop. 5%, I repeated incredulously. When the will leaves me a third, a will that attempted to give property to someone with no legal right to it, he reminded me. 5% is generous, Aubrey. It's enough to start over somewhere new. Away from all this ugliness. I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. Maybe he was right. Maybe fighting was futile. With 5% of the Mitchell fortune, I could still live comfortably, rebuild some version of my life. I'll have the papers brought over tomorrow, Ryan said, taking my silence for acquiescence. You can sign and this will all be over. After he left the hospital, room door opened again. Heather slipped in, her face tense with anxiety. Did he offer you the settlement? She asked. I nodded. Don't take it, she urged. He's scared, Aubrey. That's why he's offering anything at all, scared of what he's winning on every front. She glanced toward the door before continuing in a whisper. I overheard him arguing with Gerald. The adoption paperwork Ryan discovered might be falsified. The original documents are missing from the state archives, and Gerald is starting to ask questions. It doesn't matter, I said, gesturing weakly at the hospital room. Look at me, Heather. I'm falling apart. Everyone who helps me gets hurt. Maybe it's time to accept defeat. Heather squeezed my hand. Just wait. Give me 24 hours before you sign anything. After she left, a nurse entered with my evening medication. As she checked my IV, she handed me a small package. A gentleman asked me to give you this. Said he found it in your room at home. Inside was a tattered copy of The Secret Garden, my favorite childhood book one Diana had read to me countless times during my first difficult months with the family. A bookmark protruded from its pages. Once alone, I opened the book to find not a bookmark, but an envelope aged and slightly yellowed. Inside was a letter in Diana's handwriting, dated the month before her death. "My dearest Aubrey," it began. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Your father and I have become concerned about certain behaviors we've observed in Ryan. We've updated our will and taken precautions, but in case those measures fail, you need to know the video testimony is in the cabin safe. The combination is your adoption date. We love you always and completely. You are our daughter in every way that matters, Mom." Video testimony. The cabin safe. My mind raced despite my exhaustion. Our family owned a small hunting cabin in the Berkshires, rarely used except by Howard during deer season. I hadn't thought about it in years. The adoption date, my real adoption date, not the fraudulent one Ryan had fabricated, was the 17th of December 1999. Was that what Diana meant? For the first time in days, I felt something beyond despair. Whether the letter had come from Heather Samuel or someone else entirely, it offered something I desperately needed: hope. The next morning, when Ryan arrived with settlement papers and a notary, I was gone discharged against medical advice with no forwarding address. The Mitchell hunting cabin stood isolated among snow-laden pines, its weathered exterior unchanged since childhood weekends spent there with Howard. Using the spare key hidden in the fake rock, a security measure my practical mother had always rolled her eyes at, I let myself into the musty interior. The cabin's main room was sparse. A stone fireplace, worn leather furniture, mounted deer heads that had always unnerved me. The gun safe stood in the corner of Howard's study, a heavy metal box that had been off limits to us children. My fingers trembled as I dialed the combination the 17th of December 2099. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Inside, past Howard's hunting rifles, sat a waterproof document case and a small digital video recorder, with "Play Me" written on a sticky note in Diana's handwriting. With shaking hands, I connected the recorder to the cabin's ancient TV. The screen flickered to life, showing my parents sitting side by side in Howard's study. The timestamp indicated the video had been made just 2 weeks before their fatal flight. "This is Diana and Howard Mitchell recording our video testimony to accompany our last will and testament," my mother began formally. "We're creating this record because of concerns about potential challenges to our wishes." Howard continued, "We have 3 children, Ryan, Heather, and Aubrey. All 3 are our legal heirs with equal rights to our estate. We need to clarify something about Aubrey's adoption," Diana added. The final court date was the 17th of December 1999. However, we recently discovered that the court clerk failed to properly file the judge's signed order. Howard's expression turned grim. "Ryan discovered this oversight last month and suggested we leave things as they are, since correcting it might trigger tax complications. We found this concerning, especially given his recent financial difficulties. We've instructed Gerald Thompson to quietly file the proper paperwork," Diana continued. "However, if you're watching this, something may have interfered with that process." Howard held up a folder. "This contains the original judge's order with signature, which we obtained from the court archives. Gerald has a copy, as does our secondary law firm in New York, Goldstein & Associates." My breath caught. A second law firm, a copy of the signed adoption order. "We've also become aware," Diana continued, her voice tight, with controlled anger, "of attempts to access Mitchell Holdings accounts without authorization. Our audit traced these attempts to Ryan's home computer." The video continued for another 15 minutes, detailing financial safeguards they'd implemented and expressing their unwavering intention for all 3 children to inherit equally. It concluded with my mother looking directly into the camera. "Aubrey, if you're watching this alone, know that we anticipated the possibility of challenges to your place in our family. The necessary evidence is secured with Goldstein & Associates." The key phrase is, "The secret garden blooms in winter." Tears streamed down my face as the screen went dark. Even from beyond the grave, Diana and Howard had protected me, had prepared for the very scenario Ryan had engineered. The waterproof case contained more treasures: original adoption papers with the judge's signature financial records documenting Ryan's unauthorized access attempts, and a letter from Diana to Gerald Thompson explicitly instructing him to ensure all 3 children received equal treatment. Using the cabin's landline, the only communication method Ryan couldn't track, I called Madison. "I need you to come to the hunting cabin," I told her, "and bring anyone else who's still on our side." By nightfall, our small war council had assembled Madison Samuel, and to my surprise, Heather, who had slipped away while Ryan attended a bank meeting. "Ryan's getting desperate," Heather reported. "The bank board is asking questions about unusual transfers. He tried to blame them on you, but the timing doesn't work." I laid out the evidence from the safe. "This proves my adoption was legal. It also shows Ryan attempting to embezzle from family accounts months before Mom and Dad died." The gambling debts, Samuel nodded. "I overheard arguments about missing funds." "But how do we use this?" Madison asked practically. "Ryan still controls access to everything. He's still got Gerald Thompson under his thumb." "Not necessarily," I said, pulling out the letter mentioning Goldstein and Associates. "We need to contact this firm in New York. Mom and Dad left a complete backup plan with them." As we strategized into the night, a clear counterattack emerged. Rather than fighting Ryan on all fronts at once, we would focus on his most vulnerable point, his reputation at the bank. The evidence of financial misconduct would be far more damaging to him than any inheritance dispute. The next morning, I placed a careful call to Ryan's boss at First Connecticut Trust, expressing concerns about unusual activity in the Mitchell account. Without directly accusing my brother, I mentioned my parents' documented worries and suggested an independent audit might be appropriate. Meanwhile, Madison leveraged her father's connections to quietly inform the district attorney's office about potential financial crimes, creating a paper trail without triggering immediate investigation. "We're not trying to have him arrested," I explained when Heather expressed concern. "We're creating pressure points, places where he's vulnerable." Our next step was bolder. Using information from the hunting cabin, I located Jessica Adams, the family accountant who'd sided with Ryan and arranged an accidental meeting at her favorite coffee shop. "Ryan told me you were out of state," she said nervously when I sat down uninvited at her table. "I'm sure he's told you many things," I replied, sliding a folder across the table, "including that I wouldn't find evidence of the falsified documents you helped prepare." Her face paled as she glanced at the contents copies of emails between her and Ryan discussing creative documentation for the adoption records. "I could lose my license," she whispered. "You could face criminal charges," I corrected, "unless you decide your professional ethics are worth more than whatever Ryan is offering." By day's end, Jessica had provided a sworn statement about her role in creating fraudulent financial records at Ryan's direction. Our most significant breakthrough came when Samuel introduced me to Morris Feldman, the Mitchell family's former lawyer who had been abruptly replaced by Gerald Thompson 5 years earlier. "Howard fired me after Ryan convinced him I was making errors," Morris explained as we met in his modest home office. "But I always suspected there was more to it." Morris still had copies of his work for the Mitchells, including the original adoption paperwork he'd prepared for both Heather and me. More importantly, he had documentation of Ryan's early attempts to manipulate family finances, attempts Morris had flagged to Howard, likely precipitating his dismissal. "Ryan's been playing a very long game," Morris concluded grimly. "Even before your parents died, he was positioning himself to control everything." Armed with Morris's records, we contacted Goldstein and Associates in New York. Diana's key phrase, "the secret garden blooms in winter," unlocked access to a comprehensive file of legal documents, including a video-recorded will reading that matched the private testimony I'd found. "Your parents were remarkably thorough," the Goldstein partner remarked. "They clearly anticipated some form of challenge." As our evidence mounted, I made one final move. Using Madison's phone to avoid detection, I called Gerald Thompson and requested a private meeting at a diner off the highway. The elderly lawyer looked like he'd aged years in the weeks since New Year's. He flinched when I sat down opposite him. "I know Ryan is pressuring you," I said without preamble. "I know he's threatened your reputation before retirement. Aubrey, I can't discuss." I placed a recording device on the table between us. "This contains Ryan admitting to document tampering. It's going to the State Bar Association tomorrow unless you tell me exactly what he forced you to do." Thompson's resistance crumbled. For the next hour, he detailed how Ryan had pressured him to withhold the true will, to present the false adoption narrative to assist in cutting me off from my inheritance. He said he'd report me for ethics violations from 20 years ago. Thompson confessed, tears in his eyes. "Mistakes I made when I was drinking too much. I'm 6 months from retirement, Aubrey. My reputation is all I have left." "Then help me make this right," I said, reaching across the table to grasp his trembling hand. "It's not too late." By month's end, our counterattack had built from whispers to a roar. Ryan's position at the bank was under internal review. Gerald Thompson had provided a full statement to our legal team. The original unaltered will had been formally filed with the probate court. Most importantly, Heather had found her courage standing publicly beside me as we formally contested Ryan's actions. Together with our allies, we prepared for the final confrontation, a New Year's Eve gathering at the Mitchell house 1 year to the day since Ryan had first declared that the celebration was only for real family. The Mitchell mansion glowed with warmth against the December darkness, just as it had a year ago when I'd arrived full of hope for reconciliation. Now I returned not as a supplicant, but as an equal claimant to my birthright. "Are you ready?" Madison asked, squeezing my hand as we stood in the driveway. I nodded, straightening my shoulders. "More than ready." Heather greeted us at the door, tension visible in her tight smile. "Everyone's here," she whispered. Including some guests Ryan wasn't expecting. The grand living room had been set up for a formal gathering with champagne and hors d'oeuvres laid out as if for a celebration. Ryan stood by the fireplace, his usual confident pose undermined by the nervous darting of his eyes. Aunt Judith sat nearby, her expression grim. Also present were Gerald Thompson, who nodded solemnly at my entrance. Morris Feldman, the former family lawyer, 2 partners from Goldstein Associates, and most surprisingly, several members of the bank's board of directors. "What is this?" Ryan demanded as I walked calmly to the center of the room. "I didn't authorize these additional guests." "I did," I replied. "As co-owner of this house and equal heir to the Mitchell estate." Ryan's laugh held a brittle edge. "We've been through this, Aubrey. Your adoption was never finalized. You have no legal claim here. That's actually why we've gathered everyone today," I said, nodding to Morris, who opened his briefcase. "To correct the record once and for all." For the next 30 minutes, Morris methodically presented the evidence we'd gathered: the judge's signed adoption order from the court archives, the video testimony from Diana and Howard, the documentation of the original will that had been suppressed. Ryan's face grew increasingly pale, but he maintained his composure until Morris revealed the financial records showing unauthorized transfers from Mitchell Holdings to accounts connected to Ryan's gambling debt. "This is absurd," Ryan sputtered, looking to the bank directors. "These are fabricated documents. Aubrey is trying to distract from her own fraudulent claims. The bank has already verified these transactions," Mr. Mitchell, one of the directors, said coldly. "Our forensic accountants are quite thorough." Ryan's gaze darted around the room, seeking an ally. "Judith, tell them this is ridiculous." Aunt Judith remained silent, her eyes fixed on her folded hands. "Judith knows the truth," I said quietly, "about both adoptions." A gasp rippled through the room as heads turned to Heather, who stood straight-backed beside me. Yes, I'm adopted too, she confirmed, her voice steady despite the slight trembling of her hands. Ryan discovered this and used it to manipulate me into supporting his schemes. He threatened to expose me publicly if I didn't help him cut Aubrey out. That's a lie, Ryan shouted, his composed facade finally cracking. You've always known you were adopted. Mom and Dad told you years ago. His words hung in the air, the admission stunning everyone into silence. Gerald Thompson cleared his throat. For the record, both adoptions were legal and properly filed. I have the complete documentation here, including the judge's orders that Mr. Mitchell claimed were missing. Ryan lunged toward the coffee table where the documents lay spread out. Let me see those. They're obvious forgeries. Before anyone could stop him, he snatched up several papers and moved toward the fireplace. Security cameras are already recording, Ryan, I said calmly. The ones you had installed throughout the house last year, I had Madison's tech friend reconfigure them last week. Every move you make is being documented. Ryan froze the papers clutched in his white-knuckled grip. It's over, Heather said, stepping forward. The truth is out. You manipulated everyone, me, Aubrey, Gerald, even Aunt Judith. You forged documents, planted false evidence, and embezzled family funds. I was protecting our legacy, Ryan shouted, his control fully broken now. These adoptees have no right to the Mitchell fortune. Dad built that business for his real children. We are his real children, I replied steadily. Chosen, wanted, and loved. Ryan's gaze darted frantically around the room, seeing only hostile or pitying faces. In a sudden move, he bolted for Howard's study. The safe, Gerald gasped. The family heirlooms. Several of us rushed after him, arriving in the study just as Ryan was stuffing Diana's jewelry and Howard's rare coin collection into a leather satchel. Don't come any closer, he warned, backing toward the French doors leading to the garden. The police are already here, Ryan Madison said from the doorway. My father called them when the financial evidence came to light. As if on cue, flashing lights appeared in the driveway, casting blue and red patterns across the snow-covered lawn. Ryan's shoulders sagged, the fight visibly draining from him. For a moment, beneath the anger and desperation, I glimpsed the brother I'd once loved, the boy who had taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me from school bullies when I first arrived. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered, his voice suddenly small. The gambling debts just kept growing. Then, when Mom and Dad died, I saw a way out. A way to fix everything. By destroying me, I asked. You were always their favorite, he replied, a lifetime of resentment in his words. The perfect daughter they chose. Before I could respond, police officers entered the room, placing Ryan under arrest for attempted theft and financial fraud. As they led him away, I stepped forward. Ryan. He turned, his expression a mixture of defeat and defiance. I forgive you, I said simply. Not because you deserve it, but because that's what family does. His face crumpled, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. Then the officers let him out, leaving us in the sudden, heavy silence of his absence. Back in the living room, the remaining guests watched in shocked silence as the police car pulled away from the Mitchell mansion. The will reading will proceed as originally intended. Gerald announced, his professional demeanor returned now that the crisis had passed. With the estate divided equally among the 3 Mitchell children as Diana and Howard wished. Aunt Judith approached me hesitantly. Aubrey the first. There's no excuse for what I did. I was financially dependent on Ryan after some bad investments. He threatened to cut me off if I didn't support him. We'll talk about it later, I said, too emotionally drained for another confrontation. Tonight, I think we all need some peace. As the guests departed, Heather and I stood in the foyer, where a year ago Ryan had declared I wasn't real family. What happens now? She asked quietly. I looked around at the mansion that had been both haven and battleground, at the family portraits that once again included me, at the sister who had found her way back to my side. Now I said, taking her hand, we rebuild. Spring came to the Mitchell estate, bringing with it new growth and renewal. The formal gardens that Samuel had lovingly tended for decades burst with color, mirroring the healing that had begun within our fractured family. The legal proceedings had concluded largely as our evidence dictated. The estate had been divided according to Diana and Howard's original wishes, with equal portions going to each of their 3 children. Ryan, facing charges of financial fraud and document tampering, had agreed to a plea deal that included restitution and probation rather than prison time. "Are you sure about advocating for leniency?" Madison had asked, when I instructed our lawyers to support a rehabilitation-focused sentence. "After everything he did to you, punishment won't heal what's broken in Ryan," I'd replied. "And despite everything, he's still my brother." The relationship between Ryan and me would never return to the easy camaraderie of our childhood, but we had begun the slow process of rebuilding trust through supervised visits and family therapy sessions. His gambling addiction was being addressed through treatment, and the financial controls we'd put in place ensured he couldn't access funds that might trigger a relapse. Heather and I had formed a different kind of bond, one based on our shared experience as adopted children and the trauma of Ryan's manipulation. Together, we delved into the painful questions about our identities, supporting each other through the complex emotions that came with being chosen, rather than born into our family. I spent so many years never questioning who I was. Heather confessed during one of our late-night conversations in the conservatory. "When Ryan first hinted at the truth, it was like the ground disappeared beneath me. I was lucky," I acknowledged. "I always knew I was adopted. Mom and Dad made it part of my story, not a secret to be ashamed of." "I wish they'd told me," she said softly. "I think they were waiting for the right moment, and then time just slipped away," I replied. "But they loved you completely, Heather. Never doubt that." Aunt Judith, forced to confront her role in enabling Ryan's schemes, had made her own attempts at atonement. Though our relationship remained strained, her establishment of a scholarship fund in Diana and Howard's names for adopted children pursuing higher education suggested genuine remorse. Samuel, reinstated as head gardener with a substantial raise, had decided to stay on despite offers of early retirement. "This garden needs me," he'd insisted when I suggested he might want to rest after decades of service. "And if you don't mind my saying so, Miss Aubrey, you might still need my help too." He was right, of course. His steady presence and unwavering loyalty had been a cornerstone of my strength during the darkest days of Ryan's campaign against me. Madison and I had deepened our friendship through the crucible of conflict, emerging with a bond that went beyond our childhood connection. Her strategic thinking and fierce loyalty had proven invaluable, and we'd begun discussing a business partnership that would combine her healthcare expertise with my corporate background. "We make a good team," she'd observed, as we sketched plans for a healthcare technology venture. "You dream big, and I keep us grounded." The Mitchell mansion itself had undergone transformation. I'd overseen renovations that preserved its historic character while creating a warmer, more welcoming atmosphere. Family photographs now included all chapters of our history, biological and adopted members alike displayed with equal prominence. Perhaps most meaningful to me personally was the foundation I'd established with a portion of my inheritance. The Mitchell family connections supported adopted children and their families, offering resources, community, and advocacy. The work gave purpose to the pain I'd experienced, transforming personal trauma into support for others facing similar challenges. As December approached once more, bringing with it memories of the previous year's conflict, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would host a New Year's Eve celebration at the mansion, reclaiming the tradition that had once been a source of joy before Ryan poisoned it with his exclusionary declaration. The guest list reflected my evolving definition of family. Heather, of course, Samuel and his extended family, Madison and her parents, Morris Feldman. Thunder, my beloved horse I'd repurchased from Mr. Patterson. Even Gerald Thompson, who had found the courage to stand for truth in the end. Ryan would be there too, attending with his therapist, for a carefully timed appearance, another step in the long journey of reconciliation. On New Year's Eve, as snow fell gently outside the windows and warmth filled the rooms that had once felt so cold, I raised a glass to the gathered guests. 1 year ago, I stood outside this house and was told that the celebration was only for real family. I began meeting each person's eyes in turn. Tonight, I want to propose a different vision. This home is for all family, the one we're born with and the one we choose. The one connected by blood and the one connected by love. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes as glasses were raised in response. Later, as midnight approached and guests mingled throughout the house, I found a quiet moment alone in Howard's study. Looking at the portrait of Diana and Howard that hung above the fireplace, I whispered a private thanks for the parents who had chosen me, who had fought for me even beyond death. The inheritance battle had taken much from me, security, innocence, even temporarily my sense of belonging. But it had given me something too, the strength to define family on my own terms, to rebuild what had been broken, to choose forgiveness without forgetting. As the clock struck midnight and cheers erupted throughout the house, I made my way back to the celebration, to the family I had fought for and won, not just the legal right to claim, but the deeper right to belong. In the end, the most valuable inheritance wasn't the money or the property. It was the knowledge that family is not determined by blood or by paper, but by the conscious choice to love, to forgive, and to begin again. That was the legacy Diana and Howard Mitchell had truly left their children, and it was one I would honor for the rest of my life. I'd love to hear about your experiences with family, chosen or biological. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? What does real family mean to you? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences with family drama. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that family is about love, not blood. Thank you for joining me on this journey of betrayal and redemption. Remember, we can't choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the family we build. See you in the next video.